Thank you so much for joining us for the first session in our new virtual series, Voices from SVRI Forum 2024, Strengthening the Field Through Shared Learning. This series is made possible with the generous support of the Australian Volunteers Program, and we are deeply grateful for their commitment to advancing shared learning in the field of violence against women and violence against children. Over the coming months, this series will explore key findings and themes that emerge from the SVRI Forum 2024. And today we open with two powerful webinars. This session on TFGBV against children, adolescents, and young people being the first of the day to make participation from East Asia and the Pacific possible. Later today, we will look at structural and political dimensions of tech-facilitated GBV, of which we will share the link in the chat shortly. Just a few housekeeping notes before we start. So today's session will run for 1 hour. All sessions are being recorded and will be publicly shared on SVRI and the Australian Volunteers Program platforms. The audience is muted, but we'd love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. So please let us know your name and where you're joining us from. We welcome your questions and reflections throughout. So please feel free to use either the Q&A box or the chat. We will do our best to bring as many of your questions into the conversation as time allows. Just a very quick look at our agenda. So we will begin with an overview of key TFGBV related findings from SVRI Forum 2024. This will be followed by a moderated panel discussion with our invited speakers. And then we'll move to a live Q&A with your questions. Finally, we'll close with next steps and share the upcoming webinar in May. So our moderator for today's discussion is Aisha Margo. She's the Advocacy Director at SVRI. And Aisha will be guiding us through the discussions and Q&A. But before we begin the conversation, I'd like to invite Liz Dartnell, Executive Director of the SVRI, to share some high-level findings from Forum 2024 related to TFGBV. So over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Liesl. And I'd first like to introduce Liesl Lewitz, our Global Partnerships Director from the SVRI, who has done an immense amount of work of pulling this series together. Thank you so much, Liesl. So over the course of the forum and even before the forum started, a group of us got together to try and pull together the learnings from the forum. And this series is an opportunity just to share some of the learnings that we have gathered throughout this incredible event. And Liesl will talk a little bit more about the forum after I've spoken. So thanks for joining us. And as Liesl spoke about, we're talking about tech-facilitated GBV, and the conversation and the presentations are drawn from the research and conversations shared at Forum. And I think the interest in this session really shows the growing urgency to understand and really act on this evolving form of violence. Next slide, please, Liesl. So this quote is by Jack S.M. Key, who co-founded the Newman Fund, the first feminist tech fund, and was a keynote speaker at SVRI Forum 2024. And it reminds me and us that digital technology isn't neutral. It's not just a tool. It's the space we are now living most of our lives. It shapes how we connect to each other, from our most intimate relationships to the systems and institutions that govern us. And while these opportunities and these platforms have opened up spaces for ways to share and learn, they've also introduced many new risks. Many of you know this, but these risks are increased, especially for women, girls, and under-researched and marginalized communities. Next slide, please, Liesl. So during the forum, what was our understanding of tech-facilitated GBV? We were using it to refer to any form of gendered harm that is enabled, amplified, or carried out through digital technologies. And this includes blackmail, using private photos, online stalking, impersonation, coordinated hate attacks, and spyware used to control and monitor others. And these forms of violence often overlap and can escalate. They reinforce power imbalances creating a chilling effect on who feels safe to participate online. And women and children with intersecting identities, such as women and children of colour, LGBTQI+ populations, people living with disabilities, and people in public life, are particularly targeted through this form of violence. Next slide, please, Liesl. And just to remind us that TFGBV isn't simply about bad actors misusing good technology. It really reflects a deeper structural inequality it's about power, patriarchy, legacies of colonialism, economic inequality, and often the failure of our institutions that we trust to protect those most at risk. And we have to remember that many digital platforms were not built with safety in mind. And our current legal systems are outdated or don't really know how to respond to this new form of violence. And those of us who have been harmed through this form of violence, especially many of us living in low and middle income countries, are often the least protected. So we want us to really get a shared understanding that it's not a glitch in the systems. It really is a symptom of who the system was designed to serve. And so what are we going to be talking about today? Next slide, please, Liesl. We're going to be talking about children and knowing that children and adolescents are increasingly online, and often they're online unsupervised. They're exposed to bullying, grooming, and harmful content from a very young age. And we're going to talk about how it's not just telling kids to be more careful. It's about equipping caregivers and children themselves, designing smarter tools and creating interventions that reflect the lives of families and people living in low and middle income countries to really respond to the needs that they require to keep them safe online. And one of the presentations shared at the forum was on the global parenting initiative that shows us how important it is to support parents and caregivers with tools to keep children safe online. And it really reinforces the understanding that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. There's no silver bullet to this problem. We have to invest in locally relevant, context-driven solutions. So from the forum, next slide, please, Liesl, what is the research and practice telling us? What are we learning? We're knowing that underreporting is widespread. Survivors often stay silent due to shame, fear of retaliation, and lack of trust in the services that are there to support us. And online violence, this is very much the same to violence in real life. So there's a strong link between offline and online violence and underreporting. Similarly, legal protections are patchy, and technology itself can reinforce harm. The moderation systems that have been automated to protect us often fail to detect abuse, or they mistakenly take down survivors' own content. And meanwhile, the algorithms are designed to promote engagement, which means they often amplify the very content, the violent, abusive content that drives this form of harm. Next slide, please, Liesl. But it's not all bleak, and that's what we're going to talk about today. There are solutions, and they work when survivors are at the centre. Another powerful example shared at the forum, along with the work going to be shared in this panel, is Ayana, an AI-powered chatbot developed in Brazil. And what's different about Ayana, and what we want to share more about throughout this series, are interventions co-created with survivors and service providers. And it's a reminder that technology can be used to support safety, healing, and justice. So yeah, the challenges are real, but TFGBV is not inevitable, and we can and must choose systems that serve everybody. So next slide, please, Liesl. What research still needs to be answered? Despite increasing attention, which is fantastic, there are still many gaps in our knowledge. At the forum, the results of a global research agenda on TFGBV was presented. Aisha, our moderator today, presented that work. And this slide shows the top question per domain that was identified through a very participatory process that included multiple different diverse voices. Because we really care about ensuring that it's not just academics or people sitting in high-income countries setting the agenda, but these questions highlight that there is a need for more robust, context-specific data to properly understand who is most effective, how are they affected, and which interventions work best at both preventing and responding to tech-facilitated gender-based violence. We also identified a need for an analysis of effective policy and legal frameworks, and to increase our understanding on how to measure this form of violence safely and ethically. Also, in addition to that, at the forum, next slide please, Liesl, additional gaps were identified. Right now, most of our data is coming from high-income countries. That means that the experiences of people from low- and middle-income countries where legal protections and support systems are the weakest are underrepresented in our data. We lack long-term studies on the impact of this form of violence, and we know very little about who is perpetrating this violence, what are their motivations, and how do we intervene ethically and meaningfully with them. And we're only just beginning to explore how digital systems and AI design reinforce inequality and harm. And so we know that filling these gaps is essential if we want to develop effective responses. So how do we build a safer digital future? Next slide, please. Just some high-level findings from the forum. We need to strengthen laws and enforcement. We need good investment in research and tools designed with safety and justice at their center. We need that research to reflect real people's lives, especially in low and middle-income countries. And crucially, we have to hold tech accountable. TFGBV, as I said, is not inevitable, and together we can create those spaces that are safe and inclusive and supportive. And the presentations and the discussion to follow will showcase more of the learning shared today, and will offer deep insights into the research practice and survivor-centered innovations that were presented at the forum. Thank you so much for being part of this webinar. And I'm now going to hand over to Liesl to just talk a little bit more about the next forum. Over to you, Liesl.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. Very exciting to see all the findings come to life. So, very excitingly, the SVRI Forum 2026 is coming, and we will be gathering in Bangkok at the Centara Grand Hotel and Bangkok Convention Center at Central World in Thailand, 5 to 9 October 2026. So this will be a truly global moment for researchers, practitioners, activists, and policymakers to come together to connect, share, and learn. Abstract submissions will open in August, and so will registration. So stay tuned via our website, our social media for more details, and we can't wait to welcome you there. I will add the 2026 web address for you now, but I would like to hand over now to Aisha to lead the panel discussion. So thank you, everyone. Over to you, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Liesl, and hi, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here to moderate this great discussion with this wonderful panel of speakers. And without any further delay, I'm going to introduce each of them to you briefly. We now have this discussion for the next 30 minutes. So Rangseema Disawade is the technical advisor on child online protection at Evident, and she is based in Bangkok. She currently supports the implementation of the LEAP project. It's called Understanding and Addressing Self-Generated Sexual Content Involving Young People in Thailand. Rangseema has worked closely with stakeholders in the region, playing a key role in the development of the Declaration on the Protection of Children from All Forms of Online Exploitation and Abuse, and the Regional Plan of Action for the Protection of Children from All Forms of Online Exploitation and Abuse. Adesti Dulawan is a consultant clinical supervisor of World Hope International and clinical psychologist at St. Luke's Medical Center in the Philippines. Adesti has spearheaded World Hope's anti-trafficking efforts in the Philippines for survivors of online sexual abuse and exploitation of children, providing capacity building for aftercare service providers, mental health support for survivors, interventions for vulnerable families, and prevention advocacy. And Tulasha Khadka is a researcher and trainer at Child SafeNet, an organization dedicated to online child protection in Nepal. She specializes in generating knowledge-based evidence on technology-facilitated abuse and exploitation affecting children and young people, with a focus on identifying the roles of various stakeholders in addressing these vulnerabilities. Currently, Tulasha serves as the Nepal focal point for the Impact and Communications Working Group for South Asia to develop the Into the Light Index by Childlight, which is a global initiative to measure the prevalence of child sexual exploitation. So thank you and welcome to all three of you. Really excited to have you here with us today. So we're talking about TFGBV and young people, and a common conversation which probably many of us have had, maybe even within our own families, is around self-generated sexual content and what the risks are of these. And we don't really understand the motivations behind why young people choose to share it in the first place. So Rangseema, I'd like to start with you. Your work has explored youth sharing self-generated sexual content in Thailand. So what have you found? Why do young people share this, and how do they perceive the risks?
Yeah, thank you so much, Aisha. Usually, oftenly as adults, so when we look or, at this behavior of young people, we usually thought of non-consensual sharing of sexual images. But from the research that we conducted, the survey that we conducted with 2,000 young people in the north of Thailand, we found that majority of children share consensually their sexual images. And the top 3 reasons for young people, for participating young people reporting for the reasons why they share nudes. The first one is they want to gain likes and followers, which is about 48% of young people. And the second reason is they want to earn money, gift, and coins or game credits. And this is about 45%. So basically, children can choose more than one option. And the third reason is because they feel good about themselves. This is about 40%. So as you can see, this is not what we expected, as adults, right? Because we usually see this phenomenon or behavior as more something, toward the bad things. But what children report are different. So what do they mean by they want to gain likes and followers? These reflect the strong influence of social validation and that young people wanted to be accepted online. Even though that might involve personal risks, right? And for young people who want to earn money or give or gain credits, these show us that there's a blurry lines between private and commercial content, which actually social media platform increasingly seen as avenue for monetization. And lastly, when children said they want to feel good because they feel good about themselves. So this shows that many sharing intimate content because they feel a sense of empowerment, or they feel like they're being loved or self-worth. So I think this is some kind of nuance understanding that we have to develop to be able to design an intervention that meets children where they are. And in terms of perceived risks, I'm finishing soon. In terms of perceived risks, the data is showing us that young people, and this is especially the older cohorts, I forgot to mention, the survey is conducted for, young people aged 9 to 17. But for the older cohorts, 14 to 17, young people, they are well aware of the risks when creating or sharing such content. But some of them, are already taking steps to mitigate. Many reported they block accounts or sometimes report accounts. That means children are aware. But having said that, the data also shown that the younger cohorts of children tend to engage in more risky behavior, and maybe without, realizing the risks or the consequences. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's, I think there's a really important emphasis there on sort of understanding young people's realities, their own agency, and how they themselves perceive the risks. Because I think often we assume, they're doing all this and they actually don't know what the consequences are. So yeah, it's actually really interesting to hear about your work. And just Talasha, I'm going to turn to you now because, again, looking at youth perspectives, you have led the first study in Nepal on online IPV, intimate partner violence among youth, right? And your study has found that many young people think that controlling behaviors, for instance, like checking phones or asking for people's passwords and having control over people's communication is a sign of love. So again, linking this to how young people think about these actions, what are then the social or cultural factors that you feel that are reinforcing these beliefs? And what are the ways we can maybe start shifting these ideas towards healthier norms?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the warm introduction earlier, Aisha. So yes, at Child Safe Net, we've been working for the past few years to promote the safety and well-being of children and young people, especially in the digital age. So in this regard, we conducted this study on online intimate partner violence against teens and young people aged 16 to 24 years in Nepal. Especially like in the past studies evolving intimate partner violence in Nepal, the studies only covered the offline dimensions of IPV, that also within intimate relationship. But as Aisha mentioned, this study was the first of its kind to explore how technology is being used as a tool to abuse partners in a relationship, especially amongst the young people, like those who were involved in like dating relationship, and especially covering young, even including young men and members of the LGBTQIA community. So like we so in response to Aisha's question, so one of the most striking findings which we conducted with 4,500 population, there was this finding of how young people normalize this idea of controlling behaviors, or asking for passwords, or tracking their online activities, and even as Rangshima has mentioned earlier, like sharing of self-generated images within their intimate relationship was also very common, and it was shown as a sign of love, care, and commitment. So like in fact, 32% of the participants responded that they shared their social media passwords, which was also quite common amongst people who were in a very short-term relationship, So they had, as soon as they were in a relationship, they wanted to prove their loyalty and trust as early as 3 months in the relationship. So I recall one focus group discussion very precisely where a girl mentioned, it didn't just come from a girl, but from so many other women in the study. So they said that if my boyfriend is not being possessive about me, that means he doesn't care enough. So it's okay, So those kind of notions came over and over again in the study. And it's also very important to understand that it's not only about the girls, but boys also were being impacted by this social norm. So like for example, like male participants shared that they had to share their password or their location details because they wanted to avoid being called as cheating or mistrust in the relationship. So like now, like if we want to know how we want to reinforce these beliefs, so how this ideology is taking place. So I want to talk about the society, of how the society is constructed. Like in the South Asian cultures like Nepal, we often see possessiveness or jealousy as a sign of true love. So it's often shown in our movies, music videos. We are often again influenced so much by the Bollywood industry, and even in our own Nepali music, like in movie industry. So this possessiveness is shown something as sweet and protective. And also I want to highlight that there's a huge gap in the digital relationship literacy. Most of this young people think that navigating love and intimate online um, sorry, so most of these young people, they are taking these online platforms to um, take a hold of, go into another level of intimacy. So for example, so they understand that asking for sexual consent is important, but they don't know how that is applied in the online world. For instance, if somebody asks them for private images or videos, this is again influenced by our something like social norms, where like boys have a right to ask their partner for sex or to show as a sign of commitment, especially in the marital relationship. So that same thing is followed in the amongst the youngsters as well. Finally, there is also this intergenerational taboo top in intergenerational gaps. So the society perceives topics like love, sex, and boundaries as a taboo. So young people don't have a space to talk about these feelings. So because of that, also the beliefs also makes them fall more vulnerable. So now, like, how can we make these things better? How can we shift these norms? So I think it's all about talking openly about the digital boundaries and creating a healthy, intimate relationship with teens and young people. Especially, our study found that these parents, caregivers, they are not so much into conversation with their children about this. They think that it's the teacher's responsibility to do so. So I think there should be a more like awareness in not only in terms of biological approach, but also a comprehensive sex education. And also, it's very important to involve boys and men in this kind of studies or in this awareness campaign so that they can unlearn the deep patriarchal norms that has been deeply
Mm.
rooted. So yeah, I think I've gone a
Thank
little
you.
bit overboard the time. Thank you, Aisha.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Talasha. That's actually really, really interesting. And it's just reminding me, I'm also from India, and it's reminding me of this Bollywood film I had seen a few years ago where a man and a group of his friends stalk a girl down the street, continually harass her, finally pick her up, throw her into a car, drive her around, and she falls in love with him. And that's seen as like, romantic, heroic, wonderful
Yes.
behavior. And yeah, it's just like, how, what do we do?
It's very normalized. Yeah.
Yeah, very normalized. So I think it's really interesting, yeah, what actually both you and Rangsima have been saying. And Rangsima, I want to actually come back to you here. Because again, looking at how to design interventions, how do we do work that then changes behavior among young people? But from the principles of looking at harm reduction, not looking at advocating for abstinence, for instance. And can you speak more about this? Because I know you've looked at this. What sort of challenges are arising in designing interventions, and what are the global lessons that are emerging from your work on this?
Yeah, thank you, Aisha. I think several things that we are planning to do for the intervention is resonate with what Tulasha has just mentioned. Exactly. We also have the issues of, parents, teachers do not want to talk about sex education. And stuff like that. So I think one of the challenges, exactly the same thing. But when we look, from the global perspective and global literature, we found a gap, which is something that should happen between comprehensive sex education and digital safety. So, for example, in reality, right, we teach children what are the good touch, what are the bad touch. But when it comes to online, then that boundary is blurred, right? And I think it's our responsibility as adults to be able to guide or help children navigate, the complexity of both online and offline, reality. So one of the challenges, of course, as I mentioned, the gap, the existing gap in terms of the intervention around the world, where you tend to separate online safety education with the sex education. The other thing is often we look at this behavior of young people from the criminalization perspective. So we see this as, of course, we need to, implement the law, etc. But how do we make sure that we don't end up arresting children themselves if it's a consensual sharing between peers, right? How do we make that strike a delicate balance between that? The other thing is, how do we educate frontline professionals in terms of different nuance on the issue, just to avoid the black and white kind of understanding. So As Tulasha also mentioned, I think we have to move from my side. I think we have to move beyond just a purely digital safety program that teach children how to block and report. Of course, that's important, but we have to move beyond that to cover the subject such as negative and positive attention, because we know young people, teenager wants attention, but they don't realize it's negative attention that they might be attracting by sharing or live streaming, right? So we have to help them navigate what is that, right? And what is healthy relationship? What is unhealthy relationship? Right, including helping young people to reflect on what their understanding of their rights better, because I think with the progressive movement of women rights, in Thailand, so girls these days understand they have rights, but sometimes I think they might not understand rights in the right way. So, for example, the message of young people were like, "It's my body, my rights." So I choose to share nudes or live stream, which is something that we have to work on that as well. And I think one more thing is I think we have to work, not only with children, as Tulasha mentioned, but of course, parents, teacher, communities, frontline professionals to understand the same messages, because it's not the responsibility of kids alone, right? We all have to work together in helping, children using internet safer, safer both online and offline. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think really actually looking forward to seeing how, we can all start using these findings. And I think it's going to really resonate across the South and Southeast Asian region, but also in many other regions of the world, I'm sure. It's, really, really important, actually. So, okay, I'm going to shift our focus a little bit to the impact of these online harms that occur often, to children and young people, or at an earlier stage of life. And Adesti, I'd like to shift to you. You study the long-term mental health outcomes of adult survivors of online sexual abuse and exploitation of children in the Philippines. And of course, we know that these experiences that are had earlier in life may have long-lasting impacts that extend far beyond the moment of the abuse itself. So can you tell us a bit about what you've learned about how the experience of online abuse continues to affect survivors years later? And are there any findings from your study that were surprising to you?
Thank you very much, Aisha. So the research I conducted involved adult survivors of online sexual abuse and exploitation, specifically the human trafficking form. These were survivors who, back in their childhood, were live streamed online for sexual predators, and typically by their very own family members. And so the study looked into their mental health outcomes years post their victimization, rescue, rehabilitation, and reintegration back into society. And the findings, of course, as expected, highlighted a lot of adverse impacts of online sexual abuse and exploitation, victimization that extends beyond childhood. Extends up until adulthood. And one of the most, I feel like it's one of the most striking finding is the fact that there is enduring fear linked to the digital permanence and widespread of the abuse. The survivors are constantly haunted by the possibility of their images resurfacing online, which reinforces their trauma. Thereby, the sense of safety keeps getting eroded. It's difficult to establish, which is it's sort of like base one in terms of healing when there's already sense of safety, but it's difficult for this form of abuse because it's still out there, possibly circulating at any point. Equally surprising also is their nuanced presentation or the complexity of the presentation of their trauma, whereby their mean appears to be in the normal level in standard assessments. However, there's over 55% of them who exhibited clinically significant trauma symptoms. And it's also interesting to find out that their trauma and related psychological disturbances manifest more with increase in age. So this may point out to potential delay, um, which could have been facilitated by grooming or other factors that delayed the trauma manifestation. Because even in our previous studies on child survivors of OSEC, their trauma levels are really very low, mainly because they don't have any idea that what happened to them was abuse in the first place, and so trauma is really very mass. And so with this finding, it showed that there is potential delay where the correlation between trauma and related psychological disturbances is positively correlated with age. So as they are gaining more experience and more cognitive processing abilities, like the trauma become more pronounced. It's also interesting to know that there are specific demographics who are presenting higher disturbances, such as the females and those with partner and children, and those who were victimized by non-family members. And so, like there's really no one size presentation of trauma, especially for survivors of technology facilitated sexual violence, because there's these factors that affect in terms of how they are going to manifest trauma and other symptoms. Meanwhile, it is also worth noting that beyond trauma, they manifest mood disturbances such as depression and suicidality. Actually, one of their highest mean is on suicidal behaviors. And they tend to engage in maladaptive coping mechanisms such as substance use and self harm, as well as tension reduction behaviors. Thereby, all of this points out to the fact that there's lasting impact and complexity of trauma among survivors of online sexual violence, Aisha.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Adesti. So I guess having some, I mean, it's clear that there are really lasting and severe impacts, and having some sort of recourse to actually report or seek help would be incredibly important. But then
That's
for many
correct.
but then for many young survivors, seeking help is, and older survivors actually, from what we know, seeking help is not at all straightforward. So Talasha, your study on online IPV revealed that many young survivors definitely did not seek help. And then I think you identified specific key barriers that were preventing them from doing so. So can you mention what these were, and maybe more what strategies can we adopt to actually create more accessible pathways so that people can seek help?
Yeah. Thank you, Aisha. So yeah, our study found that 24% of the participants who were in a relationship where had a prevalence of online intimate partner violence. Also interestingly, boys were found to be more victimized than girls. Now I want to like build on what Adesti mentioned earlier about the long-term impacts. So even though we saw that boys reported experiencing more online IPV, we noticed that that the emotional impact was deeper among women and girls. It was more long lasting. So yeah, when we spoke to the girls, they talked about experiencing trauma, shame, anxiety, and even long-term depression, because especially when their private photos or videos were leaked online. So now when we talked to the survivors of whether they sought help or not, it was quite like yeah, we get it that there was a lot of victims or survivors who did not reach out for help. So when we looked deeper into what prevented them from reaching out, we came up with a list which I would like to share. So like many of the youngsters, they were worried about shame and stigma, which was high amongst girls, as I said. They were scared that their families would find out about their relationship or the abuse, because dating is still a taboo topic in many communities in Nepal. So talking about their dating relationship or talking about abusive relationship was even more difficult for them. Some survivors also felt that no one would believe them or take their experience seriously, especially when it happened online, and they had no idea about collecting evidence or something of that sort. They also feared victim blaming. And as I talked earlier, like they didn't take the abusive behavior as abusive. It was normal for them. So how do they report when they don't know that they had faced some sort of abuse? So many of them even exclaimed or claimed that, what is online IPV? Or when even when we explained what online IPV could look like, there was like, no, this is very common in a relationship. So all these experiences uh, like were the factors which prevented them from seeking help. And also as Liz mentioned earlier about the broader barriers, she also talked about this weak governance system. So in Nepal there is a lot of gap regarding the legal definition surrounding IPV, or also what technology facilitated abuse could look like, not only IPV but overall. And there is also a clear lack of child friendly services or survivor centered approach in our community. So most of the youths we spoke to said that they don't trust the legal system, or they haven't seen any justice, so it demotivates them. Truly. So how can we support accessible support system for them? I've also already touched a little bit of that earlier, but I want to put more emphasis. Like, so maybe young people need more access to confidential helplines. There could be chat-based counseling systems and peer support group as well, where they can be feel heard and believed. We should also build awareness about what online IPV or overall online abuse or exploitation could look like. This could be merged in the overall like comprehensive sex education package, including digital safety mechanisms in the school curriculum as well. There could be so many media campaigns for that, and we could even use influencers, because that is what the young people follow these days. We can also we should definitely work with parents, caregivers, and teachers, to build a whole ecosystem of support. And like I mentioned, again, boys and young people, or young men, not only young men, even adult men should be involved in all of these dialogues. Especially also we should include other intersectionalities, like people with disabilities and the queer community group. Yeah, I think that is how we can make the overall support system
Thank you,
strong.
Talasha. Yeah, there's a lot of, not surprisingly, a lot of synergy between what you and Rangsima are saying about,
Yes.
the pathways that could be really helpful. So we're at the last few minutes of this panel discussion, and Adesti, I'm going to turn to you for the final question, which is that in your work, what therapeutic approaches have you found that are actually the most helpful when we think about facilitating the recovery for survivors of technology-facilitated sexual violence?
Thank you so much, Aisha. And as we all know, healing recovery is always a very difficult thing to facilitate. And especially in this case, whereby preliminary studies have shown that therapists who are starting to see survivors of technology facilitated sexual violence are feeling overwhelmed and under um, and they don't feel a lot of confidence in terms of their competence to be able to handle this. They are uncertain on how to handle this form of abuse because it has a different presentation compared to other forms of abuse. And just so to share personally also, like I've handled patients who were victims of sexual abuse so many times, like over the course of my professional work in the mental health field. However, when I started working with survivors of online sexual abuse and exploitation, like you would really feel helpless sometimes because it really is difficult. There's no books out there that outlines how to handle them. All the existing interventions were developed for and validated for traditional forms of abuse without the elements of technology facilitation. And so one of the research objectives and the study we conducted is to try to figure out what could be some promising interventions for this form of abuse. And then one of the findings is that um, an integrative, multifaceted therapeutic framework is needed, whereby, like the existing evidence-based models, such as, of course, the gold standards such as trauma-focused CBT, um, EMDR, mindfulness-based interventions, they appear to be promising models due to their capacity to address complex and multi-layered trauma. Even game-based CBT is also showing efficacy for younger survivors, particularly in breaking down stigma and shame, thereby encouraging further disclosure through play modalities. However, the critical gap still remains in terms of the adaptation of these existing modalities to account for the digital and enduring nature of technology facilitated sexual violence, because again, as we've mentioned, survivors struggle with trauma that is not bound to specific timeline or location, but is digitally archived and perpetually retrievable. I remember one very notable quotation in the qualitative aspect of the study is that one of the therapists mentioned in traditional sexual abuse, when the survivor or the client is able to specify when the trauma symptoms started or when the trauma event happened and when it ended. However, for this form, like it's out there, so they are perpetually hounded by fear of they are consistently being re-traumatized because of it circulating perpetually online. So again, the traditional sexual abuse models often fail to address the digital component. Therefore, it is an urgent need to develop integrative, survivor-led interventions that directly target the cyber-mediated trauma dynamics, including shame, powerlessness, helplessness, and also the self-blame rooted in perceived participation, perceived voluntary participation, which is very common among the issues that are brought into therapy by survivors of this form of abuse. They really have high levels of self-blame because they believe it was they were not coerced into it. And again, the digital permanence. Furthermore, the qualitative study also revealed that all our key informants, like therapists and key stakeholders, believe that therapy alone at an individual level will not suffice. So this resonates a lot to what Tulasa was mentioning a while ago, that there the healing and recovery, when we speak about healing and recovery, it can't be just the survivor alone. It can't be just therapy and all trauma informed practices for the survivor alone, but it has to be at the family, community, and institutional level also, whereby functional support systems must be in place that will be supportive for the child to really fully recover. So this may include awareness and targeted prevention campaigns in communities. This will help out in addressing the stigma and shame that the survivors are feeling, thereby making it more difficult for them to really function socially. Working legal system, mental health services availability at community levels, and since the target usually in this form, especially the trafficking form, are those who are from vulnerable and impoverished communities, socioeconomic support is really very important for them to really recover. Like they will remain to be very vulnerable to the victimization unless there is a good socioeconomic support or medical support, possibly educational support through, for example, scholarships, possibly for them, so that there's really, like a holistic approach to recovery for them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adesti. I think that's a really powerful note to end this panel on. And thank you so much to all three of you, but you're not off the hook yet. We have about 8 minutes for questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the Q&A box, and I will, people who are asking questions, please say who you want the questions to be, to be directed to, or if any panelist can answer. Okay, I'm just looking at the first question here. And it's Khalida says, I would like to ask, in boys who were affected by violence, do we have data if the boys' relationship were homosexual or with a female partner when they faced violence? Would somebody like to answer this?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Khalida, for the question. Yeah, very interesting one. Yeah, because when we were doing this study, we also found that there were same-sex couples as well. So it's very valid to want to know whether, the partners were more in a homosexual relationship or they were from heterosexual partners. So when we analyze this, like to look into deeper whether so in our study, 27% of the boys had faced online IPV compared to 21% among girls. But when we looked into the partners, gender of the partner, it was still more higher that the boys had experienced violence from their female counterparts, not from the males. But also we did some case stories with male, gay men as well. So where we saw that their partners were, from the same sex as well. So, but then when we see the survey data, it's more towards female who were perpetrating the violence. But if we look, I mean, like, I think one of my colleague has shared the report, so you can take a deeper look, because we have worked on so many dimensions of gender and sex, so you'll get again a little bit better idea of what I'm saying. Yeah.
Great.
Hope
Thank you.
I addressed query.
Liz, did you want to comment on this question as well?
No, sorry, Aisha. I just wanted it answered live. Thank you, Talasha.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Okay. There's another question from Iftikhar. We're working for children with disabilities. Found that lack of accessibility that girls with disabilities face is girls with disabilities are more vulnerable to technology-facilitated sexual abuse. Are you addressing this issue? I mean, this could be to any of the panelists. Is this something you work with specifically in your work?
So like if Aditi and Rangsina wants to add on,
Okay.
so at Child SafeNet, so for this particular SVRI, this online IPV study, we didn't get to include the different like intersectionality for girls with disabilities or overall young people with disabilities. But then looking back into our approach, and we tried to make it more inclusive in our other studies that we're covering and other awareness programs that we are doing. So in our recent studies, we have worked with children with Down syndromes, their parents as well, and then children with physical disabilities, and we have also tried to see the like technology facilitated abuse among children with autism. So yeah, we're trying to work embed them into research. But yeah, for awareness, as part of our awareness interventions, we are trying to reach out to more of these vulnerable communities in the days to come.
Thank you, Talasha. Rangsima, Desi, do you want to add anything to that? No. Okay, cool. I think there's a question actually in the chat box. And the question is from Muchanyara saying, thank you so much to the panelists. I'm concerned about how survivors get justice. Is there support system to help with expediting prosecution and follow-up support for survivors?
Aisha, perhaps I can go first in answering that.
Yeah,
In
sure.
our work at World Hope International, that is really one of the aspects that is also very important to be addressed. Although the prosecution services, we were not able to provide that. But through the conversations with the survivors, it really is very important for that to be achieved, that there really should be a working justice system for them. But then it's very difficult, especially when it is cybercrime, where there's a lot of encryption, there's a lot of layers to it. So it's difficult really for policing to happen, for law enforcement to happen, where the actual predators, think about this, especially in our case where it's human trafficking. So we have a child, the Filipino children were highest, by the way, in the world for online sexual abuse that's live streamed. And then there's the local facilitator who mediates, and then there's the actual sexual buyer from anywhere in the world. So for the local facilitators, it's easy for the police to like entrap them, to jail them, and it's usually parents of the survivors, like these are their moms, dads, uncles and aunts, but nothing is usually happening on the prime mover, which is the actual sex buyer. So in a way, there are some movements on it, but it remains to be very painful for us to hear where we are jailing some of the local facilitators, who of course is not an excuse, but also are in very vulnerable circumstances. And so again, it doesn't excuse, but then the actual prime movers, the actual abusers are just left out there on loose. So it does going to be very helpful in terms psychologically also for the survivors when it happens where justice is served. And what the most support that we provide is to help them as they prepare for when they are about to go to court. So we help them with we brief them, we provide psychological support as they go there, and then the briefing after. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
for our experience here.
Yeah, thank you, Adesti. So we only have actually time for one more question, but I know there are a couple of questions about sharing studies and evidence and interventions, which I encourage any of the panelists, if you want to type the answers, please do. Rangsima, there's a specific question to you about studies that have evidence on which interventions are effective. And just to also say that when the recording of this webinar goes out to all of you, we will also share resources that are mentioned here and resources from all of our panelists. I just wanted to ask this one other question. Have any of the panelists found in their interventions a bias or lack of understanding from the researchers for having a different understanding of the digital world, like a generation gap? Rangsima, would you like to address this? Just also because you talk about harm reduction versus abstinence and having that understanding of young people's perspectives.
Certainly, but I would focus more on the frontline professionals that have bias towards young people, especially when they engage in some kind of risky behavior. For example, let's say police or even social workers. When there are cases like this, like children sharing intimate images or videos, and then when they reach the police station, first they will be blamed. That was the thing that we found out. They will be blamed first, and then the response, of the social worker also tend to be, the language, subtle, kind of language towards survivor also tend to be kind of, blaming. So I feel like that's a big thing. And in many cases, because for me as a researcher, in collecting data, apart from collecting data from children directly, we also collecting data from those frontline professionals who work directly with children. And of course, we see some kind of bias on that side. If I may raise an example, is the bias towards LGBTQI young people. And there's an attitude of frontline professional in general that LGBT kids are more sexual active, and that's why they tend to go for risky behavior, things like that, which, it's something that would be difficult to put in the report, but
yeah,
that's the truth. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rangsima. And I know we are actually out of time, and I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to everyone's questions, but hopefully when we share the resources and things, most of the questions will be answered. I just want to say again, thank you so much to our really fantastic panelists. This has been such a great and very interesting and rich discussion. And thank you so much, Liesl, for pulling together, this amazing set of webinars. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Liesl, to close this webinar today. And thank you so much to our audience as well.
Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you everybody for joining us today for this rich and thoughtful discussions. And I think it really reminds us about the power of collective reflection and learning. So thank you so much. Heartfelt thank you to our partners at Australian Volunteers Program again for co-funding this series. And also extending our deep appreciation to our wonderful speakers, Rangsima, Adesti, and Tulasha, Liz for setting the scene, and Aisha for guiding us today. If you'd like to stay connected, please sign up for our SVRI newsletter. It's also the best way to receive updates for SVRI Forum 2026. Like I said, abstract submissions will open in August. And then finally, we hope to see you at our next webinar, where we'll be exploring the economic impacts or economic abuse and its intersections with violence against women and violence against children. And this will also take place over two time zones, morning and afternoon South African time. And I will also pop all of that into the for you. And with that, we wish you a very good day and hope to see you soon. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you, Liesl, Aisha, all the panelists, Rangsima and Adis.